Hello and welcome to Book World on Trust TV. Now on the show, we talk with African and international authors, review books and adaptations while inspiring especially the younger generation into inculcating the habit of book reading. I am Sumaya Abubakar and today we will be talking about the book Postcards from the Salamaville. But let's take a short break, and when we come back, you'll get to meet the author of this great book. Stay with us. Welcome back to Book World on Trust TV. Now, sometimes you read a book and it fills you with this weird evangelical zeal, and you become convinced that the shattered world will never be put together, back again unless and until all living humans read that particular book. Now, our guest for today is a Nigerian researcher, development worker, and lover of words. Drawing from his professional interest, he made a collection of poetry. Now, joining us to talk about the book Postcards from the Salamaville is Mr. Nengak Daniel Gondie. I hope I did justice to your name, though. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Nengak. Now, let's start with, the name of your poetry book. It says Postcard from Salamaville. And I'm sure that, the readers and viewers would be curious as to where that name come from. Is that even an English name? Is that a town? Is it a fiction? What's with the Salamaville?
Okay. Thank you for having me. Salamaville is a hypothetical city. It's the name of a country where the whole events in the poetry collection take place. And in choosing that name, I was mindful of course, the first part of the name Salama comes from Hausa and Arabic and Swahili, peace, and Ville is French for city. So this place is named City of Peace, but I think it has everything except peace. And I think that's a reminder also. Sometimes you see places, they have these names that they don't embody. There are even places like that in Nigeria, the most peaceful places, by name. Sometimes they are not.
You mean just like our national anthem, where everybody is saying I'm patriotic, but people are not really that patriotic.
Yeah, I think that's so when you take that in poetry, hopefully it serves as a reminder, that we are not living up to the name that we give ourselves.
Well, that's the question right there. Why pick something that is entirely different from, the narrative of the book? Because obviously you would have wanted to send a message of, okay, we need to do better.
Conflictville?
Yeah. We could work with that, or you could look for an Arabic term, or a Hausa term for it to go with that. But why particularly picking something opposite? Was it because you're hoping that at the end of the day, that should be what people take home, people pick, correcting the narrative?
I think in this case, it's an irony. So you have, there's a poem in the collection where the president of this country decided just one day that henceforth the country will be called a city of peace. And I think it's the arbitrariness of that naming that I wanted to portray. Sometimes you see politicians, they declare something out of nowhere, and then the people struggle to live with that declaration, and that was what but I think if I picked another name, maybe we would have worked the story towards that. But I like this, my fictional country. Maybe I will think about it again in the future.
No, it is a great one. So let's talk about now the content of this particular book. Now, this is your first book, right?
Yeah, so there are two books that came out at the same time.
Okay.
So I think of both of them as first simultaneously.
That's true. That could work. So why poetry? In Nigeria already we're finding it hard to get the younger generation to go to the library and pick a book to read. So why poetry? What was the message that you needed to pass out there, and why in the form of poetry? Because there are many ways to send out your message. So why poetry specifically?
Okay, for me, I think poetry allows me to condense a story. So you can have, if you are writing a movie, you have to have several characters, maybe a 2-hour story, the same thing in novel has to come in 200 pages, but you can have snippets of conversations, developed in verse, and that's what poetry is really. And that allows me to say, maybe present a short dialogue without taking the time to develop the characters and the plot of the story. So you just have like the core of a dialogue presented in poetry. So for me, I would say poetry is one of the easiest things to read because it allows you to interpret it in many ways, and some of the ways a reader interprets the text is different from what the author intended. And that kind of freedom is not possible with other forms of writing. So I think when someone is struggling to pick up the habit of reading, maybe poetry will be a good starting point, because one poem, maybe 1 or 2 pages, it can give you a message, that someone else would present in a novel or in a short story. So for me, I read everything, and I would like to someday write in other forms other than poetry, but I enjoy summarizing my thoughts in very concise manner in poetry. That's why I decided to produce my first 2 books in poetry.
Now, if there is one thing that is really great about passion, is that people want to see the passion of the author in that particular book that the author wrote or something. But then when you mentioned that it's because you enjoyed it and that's why you're doing it, it shows that you're really invested in it. Like, it's your emotion. I love it. So some people would definitely want that. But then when it comes to picking a poetry book to read, some people do not really understand, because you mentioned earlier that sometimes the author might mean something different from what the reader would pick, and hence the reason why sometimes it's good to have a program like this where people, before someone will even pick a book, they have a vivid imagination of what the author was thinking before he wrote that book. So do you think creating an opportunity or a way for you to review your books could actually make impact? And I'm not talking about you alone, say maybe book authors, create a platform where you get to review books before people even pick it. That way it would give that person vivid imagination of what the author is saying.
Yeah, thank you. I think the platforms such as these are very important. Maybe it can even help someone decide on which, out of all the thousands of books in the bookshop, which one I should pick, and maybe if I have read A, which one comes closest to it. So these kinds of conversations are important. But then I think also that there are many things that can easily be misunderstood from a book, and so it's important for us authors to have this kind of opportunity of like summarizing what we were thinking about, clarifying, and also inspiring interest. So it's definitely a valuable platform to have. You should keep on doing that.
Thank you so much for that. All right, let's head on to the content of this particular book. Now, what was the inspiration behind the stories? Because I want to know first if the stories are linked, based on the different poetry there, or if it's a different story on its own, and then why, what is the inspiration behind these stories in general?
Okay, so in the book, I wrote a short introduction which tried to describe the content of the book. For me, I'm trying to shared reflections from living in areas that have been in conflict. And I think that, to digress, one day I was in a meeting and someone said, we need to have therapy for victims of conflict. And someone responded from the back and said, everybody in this country is a victim of conflict. And if you're going to do therapy, it's for all of us. I think that's the kind of thinking that when our communities go through conflict, it leaves a mark on us as a people. And also the activities that we do on a day-to-day basis also are affected by this conflict that has happened. So I decided to summarize all that I have been thinking about, whether about Nigeria, the events I've read in the news about other countries, and then also some places that have been in conflict which I have had the opportunity of visiting. So all the poems in the collection are linked to this made-up country of Salamaville, and they all share stories about experience of conflict, surviving, and even people who are even perpetuating the conflict. There are some stories about that in the poetry. So it's all linked together, and it's definitely not the kind of book maybe you read one and drop. I think you would understand it best if you're able to read cover to cover, and it's a very short book. The length of it was also something we thought about together with the publisher, Sivach. For me, it's very clear that this cannot be expanded and it cannot be condensed. It has to be this exact size. So.
Indeed, conflict is someone everyone can relate with at this point in our life. So is it okay, you know, for a reader to pick the book, read and give their own vivid imagination, like have their own thoughts of how this is, that could not really relate with what you mean? Is it okay?
Yeah, I think that's for an author, that's one of the biggest motivations, that the opportunity of listening to someone else or reading from someone else as they engage with the book. In the past 2 weeks since the book came out, I've seen a lot on social media, you know, someone sharing their favorite or asking questions, and it's really been fun to see that kind of feedback. There is a poem in the collection. Just yesterday, one of the persons I follow on social media, and I wrote about the murder of a young man, and then she wrote on social media, and she said, "Were you talking about my cousin?" Oh. And I responded that of course I don't know your cousin, but I would like to know. So we're gonna have that conversation. Let me know what it is that she kind of relate to. So we are definitely looking out for that feedback from the readers.
So in every book, you know, when the author states the problem, there is always hope for, at the end of the page or the book, there should be a solution. So is there a kind of solution in there in Postcards?
So I think maybe for me, what I would love is that the author presents a problem or reflection, and then the reader should find the solution. And there is really no happy ending, you know, problem solved in this collection. But I think I want a situation where someone will think, like, for example, what kinds of conversation do you have with people who have been in the middle of conflict, you know, and people who are recovering. It's not prescriptive, so you read how I present it, and hopefully you make some adjustments in your own. But I think beyond that, what I would really love is another, maybe one poem or someone else's book, you know, to build on this, because definitely my own poetry build on some other things that I've read. So it's always like an unending marathon. I pass the baton to someone and they pass it forward continuously. Like
Interesting.
that.
Now you're challenging the readers to have an open mind and think of possible solutions. And it's one of the reasons why people need to pick a book and read, you know, so that you just push yourself into having intellectual thoughts.
Yes.
So that's also a great one. You're one of the authors we can see that are making Nigerians proud. Thank you so much, Mr. Nengag. Now, quickly, let's take a short break. And when we come back, of course, the show continues. So stay with us. Welcome back to Book World on Trust TV. Now, before we went on a break, we were discussing about the book Postcards of the Salamaville with Mr. Nengag. That's the author of the book. Now, Mr. Nengag, you told us about, you know, the whole stories of your book, which I still have more questions. But right now, you know, the most important thing about a book is also the author. So while people are already knowing how you were thinking, you know, while writing this book, people would want to know you as a person. So you mentioned that you studied international studies, which is entirely different, you know, from writing a book. It's not like you studied literature. So what inspired you, you know, to take a turn, to swerve from what you study to writing books?
Okay, so for me, this is my hobby. And I really enjoy that I am able to pursue a career which is different from what I do, because it's what I do in my free time, my own writing, and then reading the works of other people. For some authors, they studied it in school. I'm not one of those, and I think there is room for some of us amateurs to also learn by doing, which is what I think I'm doing. And I definitely would love to see more. And there are many writers who are not professionally trained in creative writing. It's a good thing. For me, I think also the experiences that I documented are also informed by the work I do. I work in NGOs over the years, and conflict resolution, peace building, they are part of what I do. And then in the course of that, you see some experiences that really stand out, and you want to develop more of that in poetry. So I think the two are different, but there is a lot of intersection between my hobby, creative writing, and my professional career in project management. I definitely will not want to become a writer full time, and I also will not want to give it up. So in future, I would continue to combine them like that.
If there is message that needs to be sent out there, you're ready to pounce on it. Okay, so walk us through, you know, the challenges you faced while writing these books, because you mentioned that you wrote 2 books at the same time. Yes. So how challenging has it been? Because there is nothing that could be just a walk in the park, right?
Yeah, I think for me, it's very important to have like a feedback mechanism when you're drafting these things. And often your friends are not the best, because they always tell you, oh, this is the greatest thing I have seen, you know. So you need to have those really professional people you can make a draft and they critique and help you improve it. Finding that for me was part of the learning process. And then also to be able to know publishers, because it's very difficult to come out of nowhere and get a book published, because I think there are so many people attempting to write, and a typical publisher is faced with lots of manuscripts, so getting yours across is also something that takes some time. And then also to the cost of producing these books is rising, you know, and it gets to a point where it's looking like printing these books would become too expensive, and so all of these are challenges that you have to surmount if you have a story that you really believe has to be told. And for me, I'm fortunate. I have been able to conclude mine, and yeah, so I'm proud of that. And I had lots of support from friends and well-wishers, some of whom I've acknowledged in the introductory pages of the book. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about adaptations. You know, there are lots of books that have been turned to movies, sometimes stage plays and all that. So would you be open to, you know, that kind of opportunity if, say, a producer, a director reach out to you in order to find a way to bring out this poetry to life?
To be honest, I think poetry is too short for any full-length production. But one thing that I saw, which I really like, was during the book reading we had recently here in Abuja, a spoken word artist. Two of them worked on one of the poems. They recorded it, and then they infused into it a dance, which I sat down there. The poem was mine, but I was just looking at what they were doing and amazed. So I really enjoyed that, and I think art is always a call for collaboration. I definitely would love to see someone else work in one way or the other with my collection. I definitely would welcome that, and whatever creative endeavor that someone is thinking, we are all open for that. Of course, it has to be done you know, ethically, giving the credit, you know, and retaining the correct meaning, and of course, when that happens, I will be overjoyed to see.
So what about the financial reward, you know, of being an author? I know you're new to the system, but then so far, is it looking promising, you know, in case for the younger generation whom we're trying to, should I say, trying to push, you know, trying to just get them into picking a book to read, or even thinking of becoming authors in the near future?
Yeah, I think it's financially it's not promising. But someone was telling me that an author told me that in his own experience, the books sold in 4 years, and it's only after 4 years before he was able to recover all of the money invested into it. And I think for some authors it's more than that, but some will quickly find fame, you know, and then they will recover their money almost immediately. I would encourage aspiring authors, don't do it for the money, because it might not be very financially rewarding. And also you have to save, make a budget for it, so that when you commit some resources into producing something like this, it doesn't maybe interfere with your daily living, and then you can take your time to get this book slowly to the readers, and then you will hopefully recover your capital over time. And it requires patience, but it's an investment. I think even if we don't make money now, or if we get many people to read and comment, then perhaps it will be a foundation for the next one, and then the next one might be a lot more successful than this one.
I mean, art is all about that. Art, I think artists give a lot to the society, you know. It's just about bringing colors to life, making life more colorful, and they don't really get rewarded like as they much deserve. But now quickly, you know, we'll take a look at one of your favorite poems from this book. We'll want you to read, and then we'll get to dissect, you know, about that particular poem you're picking. So you said you read page 17, yes?
Yes.
Okay, let's go.
So page 17, the Salamaville Marathon. At dawn, a legion arrived, shoulders high, chests pumped. They marched triumphantly rather than walk, as though they have been soldiers. They have. At the sound of the whistle, they vanished, eating up miles for breakfast. They fled like cheetahs in an Olympiad, as though they have been chased. They have. War has imprinted life on their DNA. Survivors have evolved into athletes, fleeing when called upon to run, as though survival depended on it. It does.
Okay, now for people that understand English easily could actually pick on this, but I'm sure that there is a lot of messages hidden in here. So tell us in summary what this poetry is all about.
Okay, so for me, I was thinking about how war changes people, and in this poem I am talking about people who, after surviving war, have become athletes. And you see then the war left lots of imprint on them, which affects their performance in athletics. For some people it's not war, sometimes it's poverty. You see lots of footballers, they have that rags to riches story, and it increases their drive. And now I'm thinking about war, and I'm saying that there is a way you see a person who has survived war, the way they walk, they are not walking, they are marching, because
survival.
Well, so that's what the poem is talking about. And I think if you take the individual stories of various people, you will find some traces of this survival. So it's ultimately it's a call on people: don't let calamity, be the end of you. If you survive, take something out of it.
That's true. Oh, that's true.
Run with it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nengak Daniel Gonye, for coming to our show today to talk about your poetry collection, that is the podcast of the postcards rather from Salamaville. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. All right, now Charles W. Eliot says books are the quietest and most constant of friends. They are the most accessible and wisest of counselors, and the most patient of teachers. And that is all on today's episode of Book World on Trust TV. I am Sumaya Abubakar. Thank you so much for watching, and do not forget to always read a book. Until next time, bye-bye.